Well, welcome back, Myrmidons, to another episode of Greek Mythology Retold podcast. Today, I am delighted to be joined by the best-selling author, Jennifer Saint. Jennifer studied classics at King's College London, inspired by a lifelong fascination with the myths, heroes and heroines, and the gods of ancient Greece. She later spent 13 years as an English teacher, which I really want to hear about that, and sharing her passions for literature and storytelling with her students before turning her attention to writing full-time. She is the #1 internationally best-selling author of Ariadne, Elektra, Atalanta, and Hera, novels that have introduced countless readers to the women at the heart of Greek mythology through her vivid and lyrical storytelling and fresh perspectives. Jennifer joins us today to discuss her highly anticipated new novel, This Immortal Heart. Look at how beautiful this is. Can you see that? That's gorgeous. And it's a story centered on Aphrodite, the goddess of love and desire and beauty. And we're going to be talking about Greek mythology, the enduring appeal of these ancient stories, maybe get into her writing process a little bit, and what readers can expect from her latest journey into the world of the gods. Jennifer, welcome to Greek Mythology Retold.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I'm very happy to have you. Do you remember the moment that Greek mythology captured your imagination?
So I think it's too far back to really remember the moment. When I was very small, my parents had friends who lived in Cyprus. So they took us there in the summer. And I was only a toddler, but there's a photograph of me on the steps of an amphitheatre, a Greco-Roman amphitheatre at Kourion, holding a really gigantic ice cream. And I feel that I had a very positive association made from an early age with the stories, with the history, with the architecture, I grew up just really fascinated by the idea that when you go to Cyprus or to Greece, you can step into the places where these myths took place. There is this connection between the landscape, between the archaeology. There are stories that are so very rooted in a very, very real sense of place and time. Mm-hmm. And I find it just endlessly magical that when you tell these stories, when you read these stories, when you find new ways to reinterpret them, you are joining this chain of connection that extends all the way back through millennia to these people who lived very different lives, who believed very different things, but who shared this at their core, this interest, this enthusiasm, this reverence for the same stories that we're enjoying now. I find the survival of mythology just incredible.
That I would agree with that. Is there a place in your grown-up life, not outside when you were a little girl going to Cyprus, is there a place that you specifically had a connection to? Because you've been writing for a long time and then you were teaching. So was there a place that you went that you kind of got sparked?
So, I mean, I come back to Cyprus again because that's a really, really special place for me. And it's the birthplace of Aphrodite. So it's very relevant to this novel, This Immortal Heart, which is the love story of Aphrodite and Ares. In particular, Aphrodite's rock in the bay where she is told to have emerged from the sea, fully formed. It's such an atmospheric place to visit, truly. You step down on it. And I think because it's so wild, because it's so natural, because it's so unspoiled, you feel that there is nothing standing between you and the mythology. So I went back to research this novel. I've taken my children to visit. Yeah, I was writing my first novel, Ariadne, when we went out there, and to kind of reconnect with that sense of, this is why I love the stories. I can stand here and I can feel these feelings. It really pushed me on, because you get to a point, especially writing your first novel, and you don't know if anything's ever going to happen with it. You get to sort of kind of 40,000 words and you think, is this a terrible mistake? And it is really helpful at that point to remind yourself, oh no, this is what I love.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Do your kids do they know you as a Greek mythology author, or is it just mom on a Tuesday regular stuff? Do they know you're famous?
They find it incredibly normal. I really like the idea that they can see having a creative career as an achievable option, that it's just something that you can do. I think it really kind of gives them a little bit of inspiration that perhaps they can follow their own passions. So I'm really grateful for that. But yeah, my youngest he was 5 years old when I got my book deal. So he doesn't really remember anything different to that. But yeah, they do know that when they come on holiday, they will get dragged around a lot of ancient ruins.
That's what an experience for them. It'll be interesting to see how that manifests in their life.
Yeah.
You're a little girl, not when you look back at that picture, I'm sure somehow a seed got planted, and then look where you are now. So it'll be interesting to see where your kids end up, being archaeologists or something like that. So what drew you to Aphrodite to be the central figure of this latest? Why choose Aphrodite?
Well, yeah, I mean, I asked myself the same question because I had actually, honestly, really written Aphrodite off as a character, as somebody who would ever be a protagonist in any of my novels. And I was doing an event, a literature festival a couple of years ago, and somebody asked me, one of the audience questions was, did I have any plans to write a romance, a Greek mythology romance? And I said, absolutely not, because there's no healthy romances in Greek mythology. There's absolutely nothing. So, I couldn't. But I think that something about that question must have really lodged in my mind, because it was only a few weeks after that I was thinking about it. And I thought, oh, but there is Aphrodite and Ares. And at first I thought, yeah, but I couldn't tell Aphrodite's story. She's not one of the goddesses. I'd kind of made this shift to writing about goddesses because I have 3 novels about mortal protagonists, Ariadne, Elektra, and Atalanta. And then I had written the novel of Hera. And although Hera is this kind of intensely dislikable figure from mythology in so many ways, she kind of commits all of these various acts of petty cruelty and spite and general unpleasantness, I could really easily find a way into Hera. I could really see the ways in which she'd been misrepresented, and the ways in which, I felt that the portrayal of her was unfair. With Aphrodite, I didn't have that immediate in. I think that I felt a little bit probably put off by the fact that Aphrodite, she's so shiny and she's so perfect and she's so beautiful. And I thought, where am I going to find the human core of Aphrodite to tell her story? But it was the fact of this romance with Ares. It's the fact of this really epic love story that exists throughout mythology, in which, although Aphrodite has numerous affairs and she has numerous lovers, she keeps coming back to Ares. And he, as the god of war, so you would think a really hard sell as a romantic hero. You would think, this is somebody whose business is destruction and death and carnage. He is a surprisingly inoffensive character, male character of Greek mythology. Of all of the gods, he is the only one who was never involved in assaulting a woman. And in fact, although his realm, his domain is intimately associated with violence, humans committing violence against one another, we see him committing violence against a human assaulter of his own daughter. We are talking about a very patriarchal culture, and we are talking about gods who behave in various just atrocious ways across the board. So I'm going to say that the bar is low, but Ares clears with these. In terms of being, actually, you kind of go, this is a relationship where I can see there is something so compelling about it. And this is a man, a god, who has got something about him that keeps the goddess of love, who can have anybody she wants, who keeps her coming back to him. And that was a story worth telling. And once I started to look at Aphrodite through that lens, I just found so many more things about her that made her the perfect protagonist for me to take on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your take on her, because my research and the work that I've done is primarily in the Trojan War. So I've seen her through a narrow lens, I think. I wasn't really focused in on what she did outside of the Trojan War. So this was an eye-opening read for me that just gave me this whole other perspective. And I never saw Aphrodite. You give us, she's soft but firm. You know what I mean? What am I trying to describe here? She has her own mind, and I liked how you humanized her, but yet kept her as a goddess, and that she could have these conflicting feelings about love herself, because I always see her as the one that's interfering with Paris and Helen. So I I did not ever see Aphrodite in the way that I did when I read your book. So that was unique. I think people are going to like that. And I don't want to say, I'm trying not to say any spoilers, because you do have a unique spin on it. So if anybody was to just like Google the love triangle there, maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, because that was full of good stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, there's always kind of a bit of a caveat when it comes to spoilers, in that, some of the events of the novel have been public knowledge for a couple of thousand years. So if you know about Greek mythology, you probably know about Ares, Aphrodite, and Hephaestus, this love triangle that exists. And I so wanted to take on that part of the story, because that's the way in which I can see Aphrodite as a really subversive goddess. Because I think that when you see her, like you said, through the lens of the Trojan War, we're seeing her through this very narrow and very misogynistic kind of male gaze kind of way, where we're going, here is this war that men are waging upon each other. Which women can we blame for it? Let's blame Aphrodite and let's blame Helen, and say that it's all their fault, and then all the men can escape all the culpability for everything. And of course, it's Zeus who initially wants the Trojan War to happen anyway. So it always comes back to a man, but we always blame on a woman. But when you have this love triangle, this Ares and Hephaestus, who are two brothers, they are both the sons of Zeus and Hera, and Aphrodite, who miraculously is not related to either one of them. Because again, when it comes to the gods, there's a whole lot of everybody being related to one another that can be quite upsetting. It was quite upsetting when I was telling the story of Hera, because she's his sister. But Aphrodite, she's different. She's born from the castration of the sky. She's born from the unmanning of Uranus. And that in itself presents her as this, instead of seeing her through the male gaze, and that's the way that we see her represented in art, that's the way we see her represented in sculpture, that we see her increasingly unclothed, and we kind of see these statues of her where she's like dropping her dress and looking at us really kind of coquettishly over her shoulder. And all of these ways that we see Aphrodite are very much shaped by male desires. And you could say, well, here's this goddess of love and sex who exists in order to please men. And she absolutely doesn't. And she absolutely doesn't throughout all of the stories. And I think you can see that in the fact that she's born from the ultimate male nightmare of being castrated. That gives rise to Aphrodite. So already, like, we can see that she's challenging and she's destabilizing. But also, she's one of the goddesses who stays unmarried. And I think it's so interesting that the goddesses of Olympus do stay unmarried. It really kind of shows you this is kind of how women take their power, that they are not going to, if they get married, that they are going to give their power to their husbands. And so the goddesses of Olympus, apart from Hera, managed to find ways to not be married. But Aphrodite, unlike Athena, unlike Hestia, unlike Artemis, she doesn't take any, she is not a virgin goddess. She is still able to have as many lovers, as many male lovers as she wants, be they gods, be they mortals. She can go ahead and do that with impunity. She is a woman who makes her own choices. And again, there's nothing more frightening to the patriarchy than a woman with agency and a woman with autonomy. And so at one point, she is forced into a marriage. She is forced to marry Hephaestus. There is this contest, and he ends up being the winner of it. But even then, she continues to exercise her own choices. She never has children with Hephaestus. So you could kind of interpret from that she doesn't treat this as a real marriage, that she is not going to actually be Hephaestus's wife. And this is a scene that didn't actually make it through rounds of editing, but I did write it. There is a scene in which she and Ares are caught in a net, actually, in the act of adultery, and all of the gods witness the fact that she's not willing to stay faithful. She is not willing to be tamed. So the love triangle, it's so much an assertion of Aphrodite's independence and Aphrodite's ability to choose. I didn't want to make Hephaestus a villain, but I wanted to explore just the dynamics of choice and agency within that situation. And there are so many stories throughout mythology of women who have the ability to choose taken away from them, that I find it just really refreshing to read Aphrodite's story and find a woman who never loses the ability to choose.
That's one of the things that I liked about that. When she was living with Hephaestus, wasn't like being in a cage, because she was like living separate, together but separate.
Yeah.
And you made Hephaestus sympathetic. He was reflective of the choice, and he understood his complicity in what happened between the contest where he wins and the scene where I don't want to spoil, and but she does have to tell Ares, and that scene I thought it was kind of heartbreaking because she didn't want to do it, but she knew she had to. It was the lesser of kind of two evils in a way. And it was better to keep the peace in Olympus than to break her promise, and run away. Because Ares just let's run away. We can, anyway, I don't want to spoil too much. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I wanted Aphrodite to prioritize ultimately who she is over everything else. She like I said, she and Ares choose each other, but more than that, Aphrodite chooses herself, and she chooses the role that she plays. And I really never wanted to trivialize what being the goddess of love might mean, because it's actually such a fundamental, integral part of the human experience is to love. And if you don't have the goddess of love, if you don't have love in your life, whatever kind of shape or form that might take, then what is the point of everything else that the other gods are doing? What are you living for if it's not to have something that enriches your life and makes it worth living?
What do you think is the biggest misconception then for Aphrodite? When people read about her, and then did that influence how you took the perspective that you did?
Yeah, I think it would be that she is insipid, that by being the goddess of love and by being beautiful, that makes her vapid, and that makes her realm kind of a superficial one. That was really what I was pushing back against in my depiction of Aphrodite, that what she does is so important, and that she knows its importance. I was quite interested as soon as I started writing, and I'd had in my head that Aphrodite was going to do a lot more of the meddling in people's affairs than she actually ends up doing throughout the novel. And that's because I immediately came up against an issue that really didn't trouble the ancient writers of the myths at all, and that's the issue of consent. And it was, for me, it was, okay, Aphrodite is this goddess who is always making her own choices. So I don't think that she is someone who is then going to override other women's choices. And so I had to really make a distinction between when Zeus is on the prowl, when Zeus is looking for women and for nymphs and for goddesses, he is not using Aphrodite's power. He is not doing this with the assistance of Aphrodite, because what he's doing is not about consent, and it's not about, I felt that the bar for Aphrodite would always be enthusiastic consent. That's not something that troubles Zeus ever. It's not something that occurs to him. So I really wanted to draw that distinction between power and between desire, and the ways in which Aphrodite wields her power. That was something that I just ended up grappling with a lot through the novel and figuring it out. And I do include the myth of Pygmalion and Galatea. And Pygmalion is really, the original incel. He is this man who despises women, who takes to the streets and rails against how awful women are, and like how stupid they are, and how vain, and how they repulse him. And so he carves his own woman out of stone and has a, incredibly creepy relationship with his own sculpture. And Aphrodite is apparently so charmed by this that she brings the sculpture to life. And I really wanted to delve into that idea of, okay, to create this fully formed woman with no experience, no knowledge, no understanding, no ability to do the things that Aphrodite has done in terms of ever being able to say no. And for Aphrodite to actually have to engage with the consequences of that. So I wanted to take myths like that and give them a spin and turn them on their head and actually think, is the outcome here? And, how will Aphrodite deal with the fallout?
Yeah, that is a really touchy issue with the Greek mythology, the issue of consent. The myth with Zeus going after Leda, the artwork that always shows it as sensual and romantic always annoys me, because that wasn't the experience at all. And I hold in my mind this idea of this giant swan assaulting a woman, how terrifying that would be. That's not romantic at all, but it gets put into some sort of sexualized encounter that was wonderful for Leda. No way, man.
Very similar to pacifying the bull, which is, Poseidon's curse that he inflicts on her. These things, actually, you don't have to dig very deep to say, oh no, this is an atrocity.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you hope that readers are going to understand about Aphrodite by the end of the book?
I think that what was really fundamental to me for Aphrodite was that she's the goddess of all kinds of love. And I really wanted to make that clear throughout the novel, that she is somebody who is going to champion everybody's right and ability to love the way that they want to. And that in doing that, she is creating a better world, and that there are all of these forces arrayed against her, destructive forces, and even what Aries stands for, war is never going to make the world a better place, and that's something the two of them have to reconcile. But what Aphrodite wants to do is to create a different kind of a world, and I want there to be that kind of hope that is something possible, and that is something realistic.
And that's such a good message for today's world in general, that we need more kinds of love and empathy, understanding, reflection, all that. That's great. Yeah. So Aries, let's talk a little bit about Aries. I found your Aries incredibly like a Mr. Darcy of Olympia, even though he was a god of war. I liked his interaction with Aphrodite, and he was sort of, he's kind of aloof, but you get the sense of how drawn he is to Aphrodite. And I think maybe a little bit kind of intimidated by her a little bit. Anyway, let's talk to us about your Aries.
Yes, of course. I loved writing Aries. I really, really loved it. It's my favorite male character that I've ever written. I mean, I think that Mr. Darcy plays heavily into it. He's always, just kind of, leaving parties in a really bad mood. But when it came to Aries, because there was so much freedom actually to create this character, because he doesn't figure in the myths the way that the other gods do. He is this separate figure. He is this outcast that nobody wants to really acknowledge, and nobody really wants to worship him. And the sort of sense that I got was that, okay, well, we need to have a god of war because like war exists and we've got to have somebody in charge of it. But nobody else wants to get their hands dirty, and nobody really wants Aries around because they find what he does so distasteful. And yet all of them are benefiting from it all the time. The gods, of course, benefit from chaos and from violence and from conflict. It brings them more worship, it brings them more sacrifices, it brings them more power. So everybody kind of wants to reap the rewards, but nobody wants to be Aries. And so he just exists on the fringes of Olympus, and it makes him this outcast figure. But I felt that he would, and because he is who he is, and he is prone to his rages and his temper famously, then his reaction to that is just to entrench himself more deeply into like, well, I don't want anything to do with all of you anyway. There's his Mr. Darcy element. He has no time for the rest of them. But when he sees Aphrodite, he can see that in many ways she is like him, because love and war, they are very different things, but they are both very primal elements of the human condition. They are both this kind of urge for violence and this urge for desire. They are both instinctive, and they are both incredibly powerful, and they are both incredibly intoxicating. And both of them exist on the fringes of Olympus to some degree. While Aphrodite has got charm and she's got persuasion and she can make everybody love her, so she can move among the other gods very expertly and very deftly. And she's still not quite like them. Like I said, she has this different origin story. She has this different birth that makes her not like the others. And what she does is not feared and reviled the way that what Aries does is, but it's definitely treated with a lesser degree of seriousness than what the other gods are doing. And so the two of them do stand apart. They do have more in common than you would think from the outside. And I found with Aries that he was somebody, because he exists on the fringes, because he is never invited in or never welcomed in, he becomes this really good observer of other people's behavior. And he has this great understanding of an emotional intelligence that means that he is very aware of the pretenses people put up and the lies that they tell about themselves and the lies that they believe about each other. And he's got this ability to see through all of that. And that makes him recognize Aphrodite as something different. I was also really conscious of the fact that Aphrodite, the sort of history of how the goddess and her worship came to be, it does originate with goddesses who precede her, who were goddesses of love and war at the same time. You have these really ferocious goddesses who exist before Aphrodite, who did both. And I kind of liked the idea that if she had the worship of Aphrodite had been influenced by the worship of goddesses like Inanna, goddesses like Astarte, that when she loses the warmongering part of herself and emerges just as a goddess of love, that maybe Ares is that missing part that she lost. And so the two of them can kind of recognize that within one another, that, if the romantic in me would say, they make each other complete.
Which ancient sources did you rely on for Aphrodite or for Ares? And, I was just thinking, I'm jumping ahead too. I think the audiences, they think of Ares mostly through the Trojan War lens. So I always envision the Ares that you were talking about, how everybody sees the glorifying war, covered in blood, reveling in the battle. And so reading him in your book as the Mr. Darcy, I saw him as the Mr. Darcy figure. I had never actually thought of Ares being in love and having this whole interior life, you know what I mean, outside of the Trojan War, because most people, I think, relate to Ares through the Trojan War. I just hadn't thought about any of that. You know what I mean?
Not at all. No, I mean, so, yeah, I think when it came to the Iliad, there was not much from that I wanted to take for Ares.
Yeah.
There was the battle cry. There was some kind of physical descriptions of Ares that I wanted to take from the Iliad, and there's the fact that he and Aphrodite are so together in the Iliad, and they're fighting on the same side, and they are concerned for one another. So those elements came in, but more than kind of anything written for Ares, I would say that I came back to, there is a vase painting of Ares, and it's Ares after Aphrodite is going to be married to Hephaestus. And it's called something like Ares looking forlorn. And he's just kind of sitting like slumped, kind of looking down at the ground, like really, really miserable. So it was that kind of, rather than any particular stories about Ares, it was this really emotional portrayal of Ares that I looked at, and I was like, there is his inner life. There is Ares with this broken heart, with these wounded feelings. And there was, that really inspired me for him. Because when I'm looking at the ancient sources, I'm looking at art, and I'm looking at their written sources as well. There's obviously kind of a wealth of material about Aphrodite, like far more for her than for Ares. So there's the two of them are in the Iliad. The story of the net, the adultery, that comes up in the Odyssey. The Metamorphoses has so many stories, particularly about Aphrodite. So I was using that. Hesiod's Theogony, that's where I took the birth of Aphrodite from. So I'm always a magpie going from source to source and plucking out the bits that I like. I found a huge inspiration this time in Anne Carson's translation of Sappho's poetry, If Not Winter, because these are poems written by Sappho in the 6th century. It's her love for another woman, but she calls upon Aphrodite so much within the poems. So there are some really powerful descriptions of Aphrodite. And there are just some beautiful, beautiful descriptions of yearning and passion and desire. And those really, really shaped the emotional core of the novel for me.
And you really captured that yearning element, I thought. When you follow on Book Talk or on Instagram in the book world, it seems like readers are wanting more yearning in their novels. And I think they're going to find that in this book. So
I cannot of yearning. I love a good yearn.
Right? And maybe that's why I just felt like there was a connection between your Ares and Mr. Darcy, because there is that element of he's dark and brooding, but also in love. And to have to watch the woman or goddess that he loves, knowing that she has to marry somebody else, I don't know what else would be so heartbreaking. She has to pull out from inside of her soul that I'm going to go through with this marriage that I don't want to do, but it's for the betterment of my world and for the peace of other people. It's the right thing to do. I can't be an oath breaker. And she's true to herself. But at the same time, she's heartbroken, but she has to push it down and try to distract herself by living this new other life. And Aries just has to watch it happen, and he has to know about it. That's
And it's
awful.
like, of all the blows to your pride, it's pretty terrible. And
Yeah, I'm curious. Why did you cut? You said you cut the scene out with the net. So
yeah,
what was that decision? Why'd you do that?
so there are always so many scenes that don't make it. Because when I'm writing a first draft, I really love to throw in as much mythology as I possibly can. And the editing process is quite often just stripping out the myths that are extraneous, that don't fit, that don't support the story, or that in this case just don't match the tone. The story of Ares and Aphrodite in the net, it's really iconic, but it's very much, it's like a French farce. It's kind of absurd and comical. So as much as I loved writing it, I really enjoyed the scene, it kind of tipped it too far into, I think that ultimately readers would have found it so distracting that I think it would have undermined the emotional resonance. So in the end, it had to go.
Did it hurt your feelings to have to cut it?
Actually, I offered it up. I'd written my first draft and I sent it to them, and I had a list of suggested cuts because there's also Ares and Aphrodite have a daughter, and their daughter is called Harmonia. She's the goddess of harmony. I mean, isn't that beautiful? The goddess of love and war make this daughter who brings harmony and peace. She was in there. I just lifted her out completely. She didn't belong in the story of like this romance. This was really about how they come together and how they choose one another. So kind of bringing in a daughter complicated that as well. So I had a list of kind of, I think these strands of the story are going to have to go, as much as it will break my heart to get rid of them. Because that's what is going to serve this novel. And, there's always the future to tell those stories in a different way.
Well, maybe you can release like a special edition with deleted scenes. You know how they do that for films, where they'll do the director's cut with deleted scenes. You can give us those. I always want to hear when authors cut this out or I cut that out. I'm like, oh man, I want to hear all the parts.
Yeah. We should do the scenes version, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, that would be awesome. I feel like when I think about that scene and I think about them being caught in the net, how that would be so embarrassing.
But I like to think that Aphrodite never lets herself be embarrassed. And I will say, like in my version of the scene, she put all the shame back on Hephaestus, and she was like, he created the net. This is his fault. That was like a really dirty trick, Hephaestus. And I'm not apologize for it.
Right. No, because it was. I mean, he was doing it for the purpose of humiliating her and Ares, but her being the woman, she was going to take the blame, I think.
Yeah.
That's what he wanted. I don't know if it was Aphrodite, if I just did that to me, I don't know if I would even like him as a person anymore.
Yeah, well, this is yeah. I always, because I had Hephaestus as a major character in Hera as well, and in that, he really is like you really feel sorry for him because he is the child of these parents who are so awful to each other, to him, who've got like never seem to care for him in the slightest. The way that he and Ares turn out, I think they're very much the products of abusive, horrible parents in a terrible, controlling, coercive relationship. And you can see that kind of one of them turns to this sort of violence and rejection of everything, and the other one is this appeaser, kind of always trying to make things beautiful and trying to make things work out. So I had this huge amount of sympathy for Hephaestus already. And when I came to write this story, I thought, he's involved like in mythology in these really unsavory stories as well. And I'm going to really bring that side of him out. But when I get him on the page, I just really like him. I just really do. I find it really hard to write him as a villainous character. I feel so much sympathy with him. And I think every time I read the Iliad and the way that he is treated and the way that he is mocked and laughed at for his disability, you just cannot feel like admiration, I think, for who Hephaestus is, that he just keeps making things and he is always teaching and he is always he works. He has a craft and he works at it.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I always think I'm going to bring in like that horrible story where he tries to assault Athena and all of these things. And then actually the Hephaestus who turns up on my pages is not that god at all. He's
Mm-mm.
somebody much, much more complex and layered, and
Mhm.
conflicted.
It does resonate with the Hephaestus that makes the armor for Achilles at behest of Thetis, because he's very kind in his relationship with Thetis.
The depiction of all of human life from like the very, very small to the grand. I
Mhm.
think like a god who can pay that much attention to how humans live and exist. That feels really fundamental to his character to
Mhm.
me.
He has golden automatons that are like women, maids that seem to be somewhat sentient. Have you ever thought about that? Because when I read that, I'm like, that's crazy. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, those automatons, they're in Hera, actually. I do include them, and I include them in like a really creepy scene, kind of when all the gods have abandoned Olympus, and you have these very sinister figures just rolling through silently. Because yeah, they're incredibly sinister. I mean, but I think I always just took it as well. He's very technologically forward thinking, and he's on the cutting edge all the time. So yeah, I've always taken it as just an indication of what an incredibly skilled, kind of preternaturally skilled craftsman he is, and how incredible his accomplishments are. That's the way that I've read it. But like I said, I'm very sympathetic towards Hephaestus naturally.
If Hollywood were to call you tomorrow and make your book a movie, who would you cast as Aphrodite, Ares, and Hephaestus?
So I'm absolutely terrible at answering this question because
Oh no.
I can never remember who any actors even are. And I can tell you that Aphrodite, I would not cast her, but I did have real life inspiration for Aphrodite. And my
Okay.
real life inspiration for how to create this character was, I can tell you, Taylor Swift.
Wow.
That was because I was thinking, it was when I was thinking, how am I going to make this like beautiful, powerful goddess relatable to my reader? Not before I even get to my reader, how am I going to make her somebody that I can unlock and understand? Because she feels untouchable and she feels very
Mhm.
removed. And I really came back to Taylor Swift. I really came back to the way that you have somebody who is, I guess, in the context of the 21st century, a goddess wields incredible wealth, has incredible power and social status, has a huge amount of worshippers. I was at the Eras tour at Wembley, and I think there were 92,000 people in the crowd that night. And when you
Wow.
are in a part of something like that, it is a cult. And I am a Swiftie, so I'm in the cult, and I felt like, but how is everybody here feeling as though this billionaire, this beautiful kind of very, very distant person is so close to us, and kind of that we understand her and that she understands us? How is she creating that feeling? And it's because the way that she writes, the stories that she tells through her songs, and again because she writes so much about love, and Aphrodite is somebody who falls in love so many times, and I never wanted it
Mm.
to feel cynical, and I never wanted it to feel shallow, and I don't think you feel that when you are embracing Taylor's discography, because you are hearing somebody who throws themselves into relationships, into everything she does wholeheartedly, with optimism and idealism and sometimes naivety, but really like all of herself. And that makes her vulnerable. And that creates an intimacy between her and her listeners. And that's what I wanted for Aphrodite, that there would be that fragility, that there'd be that vulnerability, and that there would be that sense of intimacy. I think that you have a really difficult sell when you are thinking, who can portray a goddess who's got to be
Mm.
so very beautiful and so very perfect, and we've got to find the cracks, and we've got to find the flaws, and we've got to find the ways in. So like, I don't know if Taylor can act. I don't know. I haven't seen the movies that she's been in. So I'm not saying that I'm going to cast her, but she kind of was, as far as I was concerned, the human version of Aphrodite that I could draw on to just to figure out my way into it. When it came to Aries, I had a very specific visual inspiration, and that is from the TV shows Xena and Hercules. He was a New Zealand actor. He really tragically died. I think he was only about 38 when he died. He was called Kevin Smith. He is so handsome. He is just so dreamy. I would advise everybody to immediately Google image Kevin Smith Aries. That was my whole research, was just looking at like photos of him in leather as Aries. So, and again, like, we can't cast him because, like I said, he's very tragic cast on. But that he's my dream casting. I want it to be him.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have a kind of visual real life anchor for Hephaestus, I don't think. So nobody comes to mind for me. Because I'm not particularly a visual person when I'm writing. I kind of see my characters in a much more sort of soft focus way. I never really think specifically about their features. They're always a little bit blurred for me. It's really who they are inside. So I always find it difficult who would actually be the right person to play them on screen. Somebody from Hollywood needs to call me and we'll talk about it.
They do. They absolutely do. Everybody is focused on like Hades and Persephone. And I think that if any listeners and readers like Persephone and Hades, they'll like your Ares and Aphrodite because it's in the similar vein.
Yeah.
But it's a story that not everybody is as familiar with, I think.
No, I was going to say it's the contrast of darkness and light that Aphrodite is starting from the position of somebody much more knowledgeable, experienced, and more in control than Persephone. So I feel that in terms of sort of a romance and a healthy romance and something kind of that really has got that feminist slant to it, I feel like, she works a little bit better for that.
You've written Ariadne, Elektra, Atalanta, Hera, and Aphrodite. Which of these female characters have stayed with you the longest after finishing the book?
So they all really, really have. They're all really will live in my heart forever, definitely. Think that Hera made this really powerful impression on me just because I felt so much that I was wrong about her before I started to tell her story. I really felt I was one of the people who judged Hera unfairly, I think. And so much of the negative perception of Hera is bound up in misogyny and is bound up in a kind of ageism, I think. There's kind of the way that Hera can be eternally young and beautiful, like all the goddesses are, but because she is a wife, she occupies this matronly space, and she becomes.
That's true. I never really thought about that before.
Yeah, and so as a wife, she really embodies these really depressing misogynistic stereotypes. And I just when I came to actually tell her story and to open her up and to see things from her perspective, which is often a warped perspective. Like Elektra, she is not somebody who I am always wholeheartedly championing in everything that she does. But I just found so much complexity to her. And I thought, because she's married to Zeus and she is the queen of the goddesses in that respect, she is powerful. And the way that we talk about Hera, I think, really reflects the way that we talk about powerful women. And the way that we talk about women when they cease to be young and beautiful and pliable in the way that we think that women should be forever. And that, I think, in telling Hera's story, it did really make me think about the way that we view women. And I found it sobering.
What grades or levels were you teaching?
So I was teaching years old to 18 years old. So that's high school in the UK.
But did you get to teach any of the myths to your kids? Or what do you have required ones? Or go ahead. I want to hear about that. I want to hear about your classroom.
No, so I get the impression that Greek mythology occupies more of a space on the American curriculum than it does on the UK. It's not required. You wouldn't have to cover it. But I always did. I always would teach you on Greek mythology because it was also it was the way in with kids. They just loved it. We would always find that teaching Greek mythology would engage students kind of across the spectrum, boys and girls alike. They were just into it. They really, really loved it. And then once they have that grounding, once you have that kind of cultural knowledge of Greek mythology, then you find it everywhere else. So as we go on to teach the rest of the curriculum, when we're teaching Shakespeare, you can say, here is a reference. You know this reference. Like he's mentioning Hecate in Macbeth, for example. You know who she is. Like, we've covered her. And kids could see then that the way that stories never exist in isolation, the way that the whole kind of body of literature is this like twisting, branching creation where everything feeds back on itself and everything calls to, everything is intertextual, everything is entwined all the time, which I just think is so extremely grounding and helps students to understand kind of where things fit and how perceptions are shaped. I think when the goal is always to teach students to ask questions and to think critically. And I think mythology is a really good space to do that because there are different versions of all the stories, because there are pieces missing, because there are fragments that come to us and there are gaps. You can ask students kind of what they think. Like if you turn it around, if you look at things from Ariadne's perspective, if you look at things from Hera's perspective, what different story do you uncover? You have this like really kind of shifting cast of characters that you can keep poking holes in, and you can see how they've been used over and over again. Through literature, what different things have they been called on to represent, and what might that tell us, not just about the stories but about the different storytellers.
Was it hard for you to leave teaching to write full time?
So not when I actually did it, because I had actually, when I came to write Ariadne, I had moved to a different school. I'd kind of been teaching at the same school for a long, long time. I moved to a different school, and it had a very different ethos. It was a much more kind of corporate environment. And it was one where actually that freedom to be creative with lesson planning, with what we were teaching, it didn't really exist. So I had been used to being able to choose the text that I was going to teach my students and to choose how I was going to teach them, to adapt it to the class in front of me. And that was just really not the case. And this is like very much a kind of, you will kind of do this set formula and you will teach the text that we do across the whole. There were like 22 schools all in this same trust. So I found that when I moved to that environment, I really had no creative outlet anymore. And creativity has always been such an important part of my life that without it, I very quickly started to burn out. And it was writing Ariadne that kept me going. But once I'd completed it and once I'd found an agent and sold it to a publisher, I found it easy to walk away from teaching in the moment. And the sort of 7 years that have passed since, I have missed it a lot, but it's not an environment I would go back to in the same way, in those same circumstances.
I can see that in America so I teach history and English. So in the English department specifically, there are set texts that you have to use. And thank God the Odyssey is part of the freshman curriculum.
Amazing.
And they do chunks of the story, it's not the whole Odyssey.
Yeah.
But it's very much regimented, just like you said. And they don't encourage so much creativity, you bringing your own sources to the table. I always try to sneak stuff in. You do what you have to do, what they call them like your priority pieces, but then trying to like bolster that with like other things to do that creative outlet, which is one of the reasons why I do a podcast.
Yeah, you have to find it somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So what's next for Jennifer Saint? You've got this book where you're working on the promotion of this one. So what's next? What do you think you might want to be working on?
So I am writing my 6th novel at the moment. And there's not much I can say about it at the moment because it's in the very early stages. So in the past couple of months, I got a puppy and he has completely turned my life upside down. It really interfered with the early stages of this novel. I've got to say, it's a good job he's so so I've been writing around him. So it is another goddess, but it is a dual narrative with a mortal woman as well. So there are 2 of them, and they're kind of pitted against one another. So it's just been really, really fun. I've so enjoyed writing it. And I think because my time has been a bit more limited, I've just been so excited to get back to it every time I can. And so I'm really looking forward to being able to say more about it. But until it takes a little bit more shape, there's not much I can say.
That's exciting. Well, do you have any speaking engagements that are lined up for over the summer in the UK or to the United States, maybe?
Well, I would love to come over to the States. It's not on the cards at the moment. Yeah, today, as we're talking, the book is published in the UK on Thursday. So just a few days away. And yeah, I'm going to go on tour. So I'm up in Scotland next week. And then I'm just kind of traveling through the country and going to lots of bookshops, literature festivals. And it's really exciting. It's just it's a part of the job that I never even imagined, because I was like, I want to be an author. I'm just going to kind of sit alone in a room and write. It opens you up to this whole world of meeting readers, meeting booksellers, meeting other authors, and it's so much fun. So I'm very nervous and I'm very excited to get started.
Well, I'm envious of everybody that gets to go sit and meet you in person and listen to you talk about your book. I'm way over here, but at least my audience and hopefully your audience will find this and get a chance to see you and hear you if they can't make one of your engagements. I so appreciate meeting you and getting a chance to talk about. Let me put this book up here one more time. Look how gorgeous that is. This Immortal Heart. That is, the color scheme is fantastic. It's gorgeous.
It is. I think it's my most beautiful looking book so far.
I love it. I love it. Purple and pink are like my two favorite colors. If you could look around this is my office. I have pink is everywhere and purple. So it's kind of funny.
I'm in a pink dream right now. And yeah, this is my writing room. Yeah, I love it. And I like to wear lots of things that match my book covers when I'm on tour. And I'm a blonde and really well. So I'm really happy they went with that. It was trickier with Atalanta because that was orange in the UK. I found it harder to pull that off. Pink and purple. It's great.
That's lovely. So the book comes out June 9th?
Yeah, June the 9th in the States. Yeah.
Okay, June 9th in the United States. And go ahead and they can pre-order this on Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, everywhere, independent bookshops. You can order it anywhere or get the audio version, the ebook version. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have
you heard the audio version? Have you had a chance? Yet. Not yet? Oh my gosh. No. Do you know who they chose? I mean, do you have any?
Yeah. So yes, I got to kind of listen to some different actresses' recordings and like could be involved in the discussions. I don't normally listen to my own audiobooks. I just find it there's something just embarrassing about hearing your own work read out loud. But my dad he loves audiobooks, and my dad prefers to listen to books than read them. So he will always listen to my audiobooks and he'll tell me kind of what he thinks of them. So yeah, so he's the person I ask about the audio stuff.
That's fantastic. I never thought about that you wouldn't want to hear your books in an audio form.
It's such a strange thing. Well, yeah, I find it just a little bit toe curling.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and good fortune with, again, This Immortal Heart. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time, like it's a tongue twister or something. Oh my gosh, get it together, Janelle. All right.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me. Yeah. It's just been such a joy. Thank you.
All right. You're very welcome.